I do believe that it is important for our school to talk about race and derogatory comments because with doing that, it shows that the school supports people, minorities who are being hurt when this happens. When things are left unsaid, it kind of shows or tells everyone else that no one really cares, and people should care about this, especially since it's present day and this stuff is still occurring and it does hurt others. And I feel like since it isn't talked about or brought up, people don't realize the effects of it.
At all because I I know that in the last 2 and a little bit years that I've spent at this school, I've heard the N word more than I've ever heard it in my entire life. And this is growing up in a large black family, and like
The ways that I hear the N word in my life is usually just around school, um, just kind of in the hallways, when people are walking through break, or just even in the classrooms. So I do hear it used pretty often, but most of the time, I don't think people mean it in a derogatory way.
We hear the N word probably most often through social media and music. I think that's the reason why the appropriation of the word is so common, why people constantly use it all the time, is because we hear it in our music and we think, oh, that's okay. Or we see it online and we're like, oh, well, he said it, why can't I say it? And because nobody's really jumping up and down and saying to someone physically in their face, you can't say that, nobody's really thinking about why that's a bad thing to say or why we shouldn't say it or how that might impact another person. And
It's like, and saying the N word, it's like, oh, I'm cool now. And I think that's why everyone wants to say it, is because they feel cool to. I went through this phase where I was like, oh, I'm going to say the N word. But, it didn't, it's not natural for me to say. Like, I feel like a fraud, I guess, when I'm saying it. But I think people like to say that word because it makes them feel cool. And I think mainly when white people say it, they don't mean to be offensive or to be racist. I think it's honestly because they think it's such a cool word and it's trending. It's like the N word is always trending. It's always on media and in songs, and it's almost to a point where it's everywhere and you can't. It's so hard to be like, oh, you can't say it even though it's in all your favorite songs, because then it's like I can't sing along to my favorite songs. So I think that word is always going to be controversial because because it makes money, and it's like a business type thing. So I don't personally, not in my lifetime, I don't think the N word is going to go away.
The thing about policing language is that anybody who ever tries to do it loses because language is plastic and elastic and changes from day to day and minute to minute and generation to generation. And it's squishy. It's hard to get a hold of. And that's the thing that makes it beautiful, but also the thing that makes it an imperfect means of communication. It's the best thing we have, but it's also imperfect. And so everything that we say is largely dependent, well, it's totally dependent on context. And the word that we're talking about right now is not a word that I feel like, as a person inhabiting my space in this culture, has really any business saying out loud because of the weighted and freighted history of people who look like me using it as a cudgel to basically beat and disenfranchise people who don't look like me. But by the same token, since those people who have had that word used against them so grotesquely and for so long have started to take back the power from that word and to reappropriate it for themselves, I also don't think it's appropriate for me to tell those people how they should use or feel about that word. Um, if I have a cudgel that I've hit somebody with for 400 years, and then they take that cudgel from me, I shouldn't be jealous of not having that cudgel anymore. And if they want to turn it into something else, then it's really not my place to tell them what the best way to respond to systemic oppression is. And I hope one day that by the process of linguistic reappropriation, that word will have the air taken out of it, and it will be useless as a cudgel. But that time is certainly not now, and it's probably nowhere in the very near future. So I would just hope that we can all think about the ways in which we can use language where it's vibrant and lively and full of the life and vigor that we love beautiful language to have, but to also be cognizant of the fact that that liveliness and vigor can also be hurtful, and try to walk a line where we can do one without doing the other.
So I'm so glad that you're making this video and that we as a community are talking about the N-word. It's problematic and it's confusing because the word has been co-opted to some degree and rescued from its original bloody history. And this is largely through pop culture. And I think it confuses the situation. It makes it even more confusing because that word is not completely rescued. And I think that history is still is far behind us in so many ways for so many of us that many of us might not realize the impact of that word. And I think the one thing that we can do to be a responsive educational community is to come together and study not just the history of the word, but also look at pejorative language, to think about maybe why pejorative language of all language is the worst kind of language to use, and to discuss whether or not anyone really should be using that word in any sense in its newer meaning or its older meaning, and decide that as a community.
And since this topic has come up numerous times in my 23 years at this school, I have had a lot of opportunity to think about this. I have been witness to a number of events in my time here. And speaking back to a historical time period, we know that the first slaves came to Jamestown in 1619. So our country is embedded from its very birth in slavery. But the term truly becomes a pejorative by the 19th century, and then certainly takes on new meaning after the Civil War and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and the Reconstruction, or the failed Reconstruction of the South, I'd like to say, and what that meant for the late 19th and the 20th centuries. So I have a historical understanding of this from my time here at the school and as my time as an AP US history teacher. So I am an appreciator of history, and I never want to erase history, including the most awful pieces of it, because I think when you erase history, you run a real disservice to your entire country, the education of your entire country. And so when we talk about it as the N-word, but then we see it in its full expression in literature, in poetry, and including in poetry written by African Americans, you wonder what to do with it with students who don't have the full package of history that we as adults have.
Person. And I think as time's gone on, the context in which the N-word is being used has obviously changed, but it doesn't matter because it's still offensive. And I don't personally consider myself that. However, if that's being directed at me, or that's being thrown at me, or it's in the same room as me, I'm still going to be uncomfortable, because regardless of your intentions, there's still going to be eyes that look at me after it's been said, because everyone feels that discomfort, and then even more discomfort gets put on because I'm put on the spot. What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? So it creates a very uncomfortable situation for a lot of students, and I think for people in general, it's just not a tolerated thing, but nobody knows how to speak up and say something about it. No, I've grown up in a house where that word has never been used or tolerated, so when I hear it, it's very unfamiliar to me, and it's also not something that I think is necessary or appropriate. We have a massive dictionary full of plenty of words, and I don't think there's any reason to use it.
I think that continuing to talk about it is incredibly beneficial, and I think that a lot of kids have taken a lot away from the most recent assembly that we've had and the in-class talk that we had afterwards. I
think that these conversations and videos and assemblies that we have, or the articles that the newspaper did, they can be helpful, but only to some extent. Like maybe to the people that like it'll raise awareness, but it's not necessarily going to stop it. Like it's up to the people like making these jokes and using these words to completely stop it. Like it's not like you can't force people to think a certain way. It's up to them to realize that using certain words and saying certain things aren't funny and it's not okay. It's not. I think now we finally are addressing the situation at hand, and it's nice, but the last couple years, absolutely not. I know friends, black friends, who've left Lake Oswego High School because of the comments that were made or how they felt isolated, and nothing was said or done. And so I was surprised when we had a newspaper and an assembly, and I was also happy because once again it just shows that the school supports us minorities. Even if we are only a little percentage of the school, we still are thought about.
I like how much we think about things and how much we're, willing to have tough conversations when the opportunity presents itself. And I think we will do better going forward.
That we had afterwards, I think that a lot of kids are taking good things away from it. I also think that another half of the student body has maybe taken it kind of as a joke, and that's also the part that we need to watch out for, because some people will take things more seriously than others, and those that aren't taking this situation as seriously probably just need to become more informed on the situation and just become more educated on what it means and what it means to other people when you say it.
Education is how you make people more knowledgeable about what offends other people. And I think it's also important for us to be patient on the other side, because not everyone grew up like you, so everyone's going to have a different perspective, and you can't just automatically get upset if someone's opinion is different from yours, and you have to be patient and try to educate them on why saying something or doing something is offensive to a large group of people.
It's hard because I can't tell one black person to another black person, you can't say those things between each other, because they understand like all of the things that come with that word. If I call a black person that word, as a black person, I'm understanding all the negative things that come and that are associated with that word. If a white person is calling a black person that, it's a hierarchy thing, because you don't understand what that word has, like what the disadvantages of that word has brought that person. Being that thing in our society isn't a good thing, and it's not seen as a good thing, and it hasn't been seen as a good thing. So I think black person to black person, it's called black intimacy, and I think that's just something that we have to kind of accept. I think every culture has that kind of intimacy in which they can hold each other.
I mean, I think that's a perfect term for it, black intimacy. It's like, it's such a, I don't know. I mean, obviously it can be said with hostility just like anything else, but most of the time it makes you feel comfortable to be in a group of black people and you're saying it. It's like, I don't know, it's beautiful in a way. And it's weird that it came from something hateful. And I mean, I never say it I never say it at school, but I never call anyone at school this. I mean, I've said it before at school, but like very rarely. And what I do is like, I'll use it with my black friends, like exclusively. And that's what makes it beautiful to me, is like, it's this thing that brings us all closer together. Like, you have black friends at this school that we've been going through the same things, and that's what makes us closer. And it's like, it's this one final thing that brings us all together. And that's what kind of makes it hurt a little bit more when other people use it, is that it's like, you don't even know like what we've been through to be using this. And like, I've heard people complain and they'll be like, well, why do you get to say it, but I don't get to say it? And I'm just like, well, why do you get to live your life the way you do, and I don't get to live my life in like such a carefree way? It's, so yeah, that, I'm sort of bringing it back to the black intimacy thing. It definitely is, and I'll admit to it unapologetically that I use it with my black friends in person, over text, with my sister. I'm not afraid to say it in front of my father. I'm not afraid to say it in front of any of my family members. And that's how it is for me. Thank you to everybody for taking the time to look at the newspaper, and it's very much appreciated that people have been accepting what I'm saying and taking it into account. If people disagree with it, I hope you know that if you came up and talked to me about it, I wouldn't get mad at you. And the disagreements are what make the discussion progress.